My name's Emily Marshke. I'm the Operations and Professional Programs Manager at the API, and I look after our Professional Women's Program. So welcome today on International Women's Day. So I think you all know who the API are, the Australian Power Institute. We're a not-for-profit and we look after the continuing education of engineers in the electrical energy space. So I'm going to run through things quite quickly this morning because we have Leeanne here for the beginning of our meeting. And then when we go off and do some quiz stuff, she unfortunately has to leave. So we'll get moving quite quickly today. And so just before we start, we'd like to acknowledge the country that we're on at the moment. As we meet today, connecting a diverse community of people across Australia, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of these lands and their continuing connection to land, waters and community. We pay our respect to the cultures and the elders past, present and emerging. So this is just our API team. We've got Steph and Asta here today. And I think Cameron and Hayley are joining us at some point. And unfortunately, David is ill today, so he won't be joining us, but we will keep going through this step. And just to remind you of our members that support the API and support our team and support all of you through activities such as the Powerful Women Program. We've just put them up on our screen for you now. Click into the next. Click through, Steph. Okay, just before we start, this is a special one from Stephanie. We would like you to answer a question. What skill do you wish you were more confident in?
There we go. I can see some people typing. Thanks, everyone. That's looking really good.
I'll have a look at this again at the end of it, but that's good to give us a start. Today, I have the privilege of introducing Leeanne Bond, a lady that I have known for a long time, and birthday girl for tomorrow. So she knows I know that. I'd just like to welcome a very well-respected engineering executive. Leeanne is a board, a chair, an advisor and mentor, and was the first female Australian Professional of the Year in 2007. She has over 30 years experience in the energy sector, from energy and resources, business strategy, infrastructure and government major projects, and someone I have known for a long time. And when I was she's been quite inspirational for me as a female engineer coming through as a young engineer at university, knowing that Leeanne's been such a successful engineer throughout her career. So I'd like a warm welcome to Leeanne Bond.
Thank you, Emily.
You're welcome.
Am I on now?
Yes.
So you've just reminded me, and I do have a big birthday tomorrow, and I'm reflecting that I used to always be the youngest person in the group I was working in, and now it's probably the other way around. And I actually worked with your father, so yeah, so we've got long connections as well as through Engineers Australia. So well thank you very much, and thank you for reaching out to me to talk about this topic today. I'm sorry that I do have to leave for the quiz, which sounds like a lot more fun than my talk, but I'll try to give you a few ideas and hopefully we can have some Q&A. So for those who don't know me, my name is Leeanne Bond. I'm a chemical engineer, graduated from University of Queensland in the late 80s. And like most chemical engineers back then, we all wanted to work in the oil industry. How things have changed. Now I think it's, water and renewable energy and utilities. So my first few years, I came out at a time that was very difficult to get a job. The end of the 80s, there was a lot of redundancies, and so I had a bit of a interesting start. And at the time, I thought, this isn't working the way I thought it was going to be. But I suppose, that teaches you that actually things aren't all ordained. You just find your way. And within a couple of years, I had a great opportunity with a graduate traineeship, and then I started in engineering design in a consultancy in Brisbane. So that's really where the track of my career began. My first probably 10 years was as a process design engineer in oil and gas, oil refining and allied industries. And as I went through that, I got very interested in the client and what were we designing. And I think we'll talk about that a bit later, the why of the project. So I naturally moved into identifying the projects and working with the client to work out what they wanted, and then putting a team together to deliver. So that moved me from my technical role into more of a design management role and then a project management role. And then I've progressed into business management, generally because most of the engineers I work with didn't want to run the business, and I was quite keen to get out there and do that. So I became the general manager Queensland for Worley at the time. Very briefly, part of my journey is that alongside that, I was always very active with professional bodies in engineering. And that was initially the Institution of Chemical Engineers, and then it was Engineers Australia. So that became quite a big part of my life and did help me in doing some different things that I probably wouldn't have thought about. So I think the theme Together We Engineer, which Emily's given me, is very relevant to the way I approach my work, and particularly now in the boardroom. So that progression from a technical doing, which I loved, to a directing a team, and then really understanding the business side of the value of what I was doing, then got taken another step further when I was asked through my role with Engineers Australia, would I nominate to be the Queensland president in the Queensland division. And I was the first female president, and I think, Emily, you probably noticed that one, and there are still people that remember that. That was 23 years ago or something, in 2002. But it was a big moment for me to take that on, and it did help to shape some career direction. So I'll talk about that in a minute. But it was also a point at which I could have said, oh no, that's not for me. I was busy enough. It was a decision that I had to make. So I think working together, just looking at that, by taking on that role, I then got further out of the work that I was doing day to day, and I started to interact with other businesses and other sectors, not in chemical engineering or not in oil and gas. And I started to interact with government and policy, which I had never really had much to do with. So the ability to go across different parts of an industry and understand other people's perspectives became really important to me. So I did take that on, and it was an amazing experience, and I grew a lot through that experience. And I had a high profile because I was the first female, and we actually used that as an opportunity to get some messages across for engineering that we'd been struggling to do. So I think part of that would be just being brave. And I was pretty uncomfortable about doing it up until that time. I was an engineer first. I didn't want to be seen as a female. Then I realised, well, I actually am seen as a female. Doesn't matter what I think about it. So get over it. And then once I got to that point, I then fully embraced that role. So that led on to an opportunity which had never been on my radar. And in fact, when the opportunity presented itself, I didn't really understand the opportunity. So 2 years after I'd been the president of Engineers Australia and Queensland and done a lot of public speaking and become very comfortable with that, I was back running part of the Worley business and building the business. And I got a phone call from a guy that some of you might know, Ken Dredge, who was then the chair of Toorong Energy. And he rang me and he said, would your employer let you do an outside board? Would you nominate for the board? We have an opportunity for you. And I had the presence of mind to say, I don't know, I'll call you back, and put the phone down. And what the hell was that? I don't actually know what a board is. I don't know what governance is. And consulted a lot of people and decided to do that role. All the engineers I talked to said, no, you don't want to do that. It's, there's nothing in it. The CEO will run the place. You're just there to rubber stamp. And it's too high risk. And I thought, can't be high risk if you're not doing anything. So that doesn't make sense. I then spoke to my company's company secretary, and she said, you've got to do this. It'll be great for your growth. So I did do it, thinking I can do it for one term. At the end of 3 years, if I don't like it, sorry, I'm really busy, I can't continue. But it was, again, another turning point. So, taking on the profile of being Queensland president then led to being given an opportunity to be on a board, which I wasn't looking for. And that then changed my career direction. So, of course, I loved being on the board, and happy to talk about what that's like. But at its best, it's really working with and enabling the management team. So the first thing is to get the right CEO, and then support them and their management team, and then guide and approve the strategy. So it's a very collaborative effort, and I love that. And so that's what I'm doing now. So I decided that I couldn't continue my executive role and do more boards. It wouldn't have been fair to my organisation. So for 20 years now, I've been on boards, and I have changed my portfolio. But the energy industry is a big part of that. And it's a big thread. So engineering and energy and technology is a big thread in what I do. The role of women in building the future. So I've talked about being thrust into realising that actually people see me as female before they see me. It was in around the 2000s, and there was a bit of talk about, women on boards, but it really wasn't a big thing. And certainly in engineering, there were very few women taking leadership roles, but I did have some amazing people to follow. And one of them, probably a few people on this call might know, is Elsa Shepherd, who is a former chair of Powerlink. And she really was probably my rock getting through that period of understanding how did I lead as a woman in this industry. There's a number of others as well. You probably know Kathy Hirschfeld, who's in that role now, Merrin York. There's a number of women in this industry. But I did get faced quite often with being told that I had the role because I was female, which is so far from the truth that, you just have to learn how to deal with that. And I think the learning there that I had was I would never have been appointed to anything that I've done if that was the case, if I didn't have the ability. When Ken rang me he rang me because he knew I was running a business, I had credibility, and he knew that he would be able to sell me as a director, even though I wasn't experienced as a director. And I think that's where women in particular, but women and men, need to realise that, you know, appointments are made. It's then how you perform in that role as to whether or not you're going to retain it. And you will not retain it if you can't do the role. But I think people don't put people in roles that they don't think that they can perform in. So that's where I think being brave and saying, well, okay, let's go for this, does really give you a lot of advantages in the opportunities that will be presented. So I think being the only one in the room, one of the points that Emily's given me here, it's not insignificant, but for me, I think having been thrust into the spotlight of making a lot of public speaking, you know, a lot of presentations, which was not something I was used to, it probably helped me in being able to just be the only woman in the room and ignore that. So it's practice, you know, and it's just maybe acknowledging it if you want to, but just be yourself. I think there's a lot better understanding of that now. And I was talking to a guy that I work with the other day, and he said he was on a particular committee and he was the only man. I said, oh, what did that feel like? And he had to reflect because, you know, and I said, well, that's, you know, that's a learning. He actually was quite comfortable with it, but he had to reflect that, yeah, I was the only man, actually, the way he told me the story. I think the other thing I'd say with women and engineering, we do have a great way of supporting each other. So in my experience, everyone that I've worked with has always leaned out to help me or to support me, and I also get it reflected back. So beautiful comments like Emily's, and, you know, other people that reach out to me saying that I've had an effect for them. So I do think sometimes people can say, you know, women don't help each other, but I actually don't think that's true. I think they do, and we acknowledge it quite well. In the early 2000s, so about 20 years ago, I was involved in a government advisory board, which was the Smart Women, Smart State advisory board, which was providing advice to the Minister for Women on how do we get more women into non-traditional roles, STEM roles. And at the time, I didn't realise how groundbreaking that was. In Australia, that was probably the leading thing that was happening. At the same time, in Engineers Australia, there was interest in a national women in engineering group, you know, around the same time. And then I became the first female president, and only the second in Australia a couple of years later. So I didn't realise at the time that that was all new, you know, because when something's new, you don't always realise it's new. Looking back, you think, well, actually, that was a pretty interesting time for women in this industry. So we put on a conference for first-year engineering students, and we thought, well, there's so few, but what can we do? So we put them all in a room once a year and said, we love you, and, you know, stick with it. It's a hard course. And so that was called the Women Engineering Queensland Seminar. And we did it because we didn't think the students were getting that support at the universities. But I'm glad to say within a few years of doing that, the universities had really done similar programs, and I'd been involved in one at one of the universities. And so it didn't need to be done anymore. So I think there's real interventions that, you know, that have been done over the last 20 years. So I think before I give back to Emily, I think the role of the engineering team was also another thing that through Engineers Australia was very big in the last, you know, 20 years. So I think engineers maturing to realise it's not just all about technical. In fact, a lot of it's not about technical. And that means we can't work in groups of engineers exclusively. And so while we might want to celebrate individual technical merit, and that is very important, we also need to celebrate the different voices in the teams that we're working with. And I think at university, you don't really understand that. It's later that you realise, actually, I do need very different voices. I just did a leadership course, which was just launched last year from UQ and Oxford working together. And one of the things they talk about is, who's your ugly dance partner? Who is the person that you don't get on with, that you actually need to work with because they will reflect things to you that you won't think about? So who is it, that we should reach out to who's completely opposite, to really sort of pull different ideas together? So I think, to me, a lot of it is about finding commonality, finding areas where people can agree. But I think keeping that in mind, that actually you do need to have people who will challenge you and challenge other people sometimes. And that's okay, and it actually gives you a better result. So, Emily, I think I might let you take it, because I could talk for all the time we've got, but I really want to give people a few minutes.
Stephanie is in charge of questions today, so I'll let her go for it.
I am in charge of questions. Leeanne, we have asked for some questions from the audience using Slido. Hopefully you guys can all see that. We have 10 questions. I know we don't have much time with you. We've got about 8 minutes, so maybe we do the old classic, quick fire round, and we'll get some short answers to some of these questions. I'm actually going to start with the one at the bottom. What's your view on the myth of, and let's see if I can pronounce this right, meritocracy? Meritocracy, that's it. And how can we spread the message that DEI initiatives don't hire just to fill quotas?
Yeah, and I think that was sort of what I was touching on. I almost used the word merit, and then I thought I don't want to even throw that word in this conversation. But so that's where I think we've gone a long way to people not thinking this way anymore. But if you do come across it, and there may well be times when people will say it to your face, that, I'd be doing that except all the roles are going to women. And it's not true, but also it undermines the way people get appointed to things at the moment anyway. People don't get appointed generally because they are the best candidate. They're the candidate people know, and they're the candidate that the person who's appointing them is comfortable with. So meritocracy is about broadening that base, and it is not inconsistent, and it's probably correlated that more merit probably means more diversity. So it's quite challenging for people, because that undermines that maybe some of the appointments they've been making aren't meritorious, and they think they are because we're rational beings. But once you disconnect the two and say they're not at all in conflict, in fact, they're probably supporting each other. The broader pool of different diverse experiences should give you a better choice of candidates for roles, and therefore, it's not a ticker box.
Mm. I'm actually going to go to another question that is, I think, third from the bottom. It's quite interesting. How many international opportunities do you feel, a role in engineering offers? But then there's a separate second question. In your governance work, how much is politics involved versus your actual expertise as an engineer? Maybe we focus on that one, because, being on the board, you can be political, and that you're dealing with, as you said, your ugly dance partners sometimes. So yeah, in your
So hopefully not at your board, but there are a variety of, and that's a good board has got a variety of different types of people with different ways of thinking and different experiences. And so, the role of the chair is to really work with all those different parts of the board. A good, well-performing board shouldn't be running politics. Everyone should be there for the company, and so that's the role of the chair, to make sure that everything is out in the open, and if people are concerned about things, they bring it to everyone. I think you have to be aware of stakeholders. So, as a board, you're not independent of the rest of the world, and you have to understand what else is important. And I think that's to my point about not everything's technical. There's actually commercial considerations. There might be other considerations. But to the international opportunities, I mean, engineering has always been an amazing opportunity for travel if people want to do it. I think COVID was a bit challenging, but I think we're past that, and the global instability, would be a little challenging, but I think huge international opportunities to travel, but also to collaborate, even if you don't travel. Yeah.
And I think back on this day, International Women's Day. I mean, it's an international day, which shows that, there's obviously the need internationally to celebrate women in engineering.
I would just comment that Marlene Kanga, who is a former president of Engineers Australia, was instrumental in getting it on the agenda. So there you go.
Wonderful. I think we might have one more, a bit more time for one more question. Do you think energy engineering or power engineering is a growing sector of engineering? And what do most power engineers or energy engineers do over a 6-month span of work? Maybe we focus on the first half. Do you think power engineering is a growing sector?
Yeah. So as I said, a lot of what I do, I mean, the Queensland Energy Systems Advisory Board, we're getting advice on the planning and the system as it will progress through the energy transition. So there's so much opportunity for people, both in the electricity sector or in the gas and energy sector a bit more broadly, but also in industry. So industry is trying to decarbonise, and energy is a huge part of that. So being able to apply different, to understand how that interacts. For me, the big area is systems engineering, understanding the whole network, being able to understand what AEMO is up to, and the transmission and the distribution. It's quite a complicated thing to get your head around, and huge opportunities.
Any final advice for women starting out in leadership positions within their workplaces?
I think find someone that you can form a bond with to be your initial mentor. Your mentor might change over time. I've had lots of different people help me along my time, but generally, if you say to someone, could I buy you a coffee? Would you be my mentor? They might be a bit surprised, but you'll be surprised. They might ask why. Why them? But most people are very generous with their time. So if you think about what you might need to learn and who might be able to help you with that, just be brave and ask them.
Wonderful. Back to you, Emily. Oh, you're on mute.
I'm also part of a book club. And it sounds odd and all the rest, but it's a bunch of female engineers in a book club, and that has been fantastic for me. And when I was looking at joining the API, they were fantastic for me there. But I'd also like to take this opportunity to just thank you very much, Leeanne. It has been wonderful having you here, and you're a great inspiration to probably all of us here. And thank you very much